Hi, everyone. It's Janice, host of the Divorcing Religion podcast. Thanks for tuning into my show, whether you're joining me on audio or video. I've heard from some folks recently who have told me just how much the show has meant, and some of them have even found it not only to be life-changing, but life-saving, as they felt there was no one else who understood what they were going through, and they found the Divorcing Religion podcast, and they started feeling encouraged. Please help me keep my show on the air. Become a member by clicking the join button on the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious trauma recovery coach. I have a content warning today. I'll be talking about sex and purity culture with my guest who knows an awful lot about it. My guest today is Andreya Jones. Andreya grew up in a conservative evangelical community and was an MK, and I feel like my viewers will know that stands for missionary kid, in Papua New Guinea and Senegal, West Africa. Andreya has a doctorate in clinical sexology, is a licensed clinical social worker, and is an AASECT, A-A-S-E-C-T certified sex therapist who owns a private practice in Pennsylvania. In the process of deconstructing from Christian evangelicalism and becoming the person she was meant to be, Andreya decided to devote her time and energy to helping other women who have had similar experiences. She's passionate about helping clients navigate their relationships, sexuality, and pleasure. In fact, she has recently completed a book about purity culture and female sexuality, written for therapists who work with women from this specific population, and I look forward to hearing about that. Andreya has the privilege of living with and loving her two rambunctious kids, bulldog and wife. Welcome, Andreya. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I heard from you because you know Tessie Muskrat, who will be speaking at the Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture, happening in Seattle next year in May of 2025. And then she was able to get us into contact with each other, and I'm so glad she did, because I'm super excited and curious about the work that you do and about the life that you've lived. It just sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm here to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Excellent. Well, start us off talking about what it was like to be a missionary kid growing up in places most of us will only hear about or see on a map, and how being indoctrinated from childhood, really from birth, potentially, how that influenced you and what your journey's been like. So take us back to your childhood, if you would.
Okay. So my parents worked with a missionary organization, and they actually both went into the mission field as single people. They met on the mission field and got married. And then they moved to Papua New Guinea, which is an island above Australia. And that is where I was born. And so we lived there the majority of my life, other than 2.5 years, we moved to Senegal, West Africa, and we lived there, but then we went back to Papua New Guinea. So as a missionary kid, basically I lived on this compound of about 1,000 missionaries, which was at the time the biggest missionary compound in the world. And so I grew up with a fence around the entire compound, and we had guard dogs and security men just, doing circles all day long around to protect us, right? So I grew up in this really conservative Christian world, where I was taught that, there's only one religion. The greatest gift that we could give to people was to go to other countries and teach them about Jesus and translate the Bible into their language and help them understand that this was the true religion. And I honestly thought that there was only one religion, right? I went to all church constantly. Like we went to church in the morning. We went to Bible study. We went to Sunday school. We did all of that. And Then I went to a Christian school where we had teachers from all over the world that were missionaries came and taught us at an international school.
Was that on the compound?
On the compound. Yeah.
Oh, so you didn't have to go far away and be separated and sent to boarding school. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. That can be a difficult situation.
Yeah, I didn't, but lots of my friends did. So a lot of the Bible translators, they would be out in the villages and their kids would be on the compound. But my mom was a teacher and my dad is an artist. And so we lived on the compound. So I got to be with my parents all the time, I was really lucky because a lot of kids barely ever saw their parents because they were out in the village for months on end and would live in these dorms. We called them hostels, and they would just have hostel parents and then they would live away from their parents. So
how does it work? I got to ask. I never heard of a missionary who was an artist.
Yeah. So my dad was the only artist for the organization, but he would go out into the villages. And because we didn't speak the language, there was over 860 languages in Papua New Guinea. So when you go out to a village and you can't speak the language, what we would do to teach them and to learn their language is my dad would draw an apple and then say apple. And then they would tell us what they call an apple. And so he taught the national people how to illustrate, how to draw, so that we could create alphabets. We could create the written word, language for them. And that's what my dad did. They just retired, but that's what he did for 40 something years.
That's so, in some ways, I find that beautiful and really powerful, enabling people to communicate, people who do not have the same background, the same language. It's just somewhat concerning, of course, the whole idea of colonization and missionary work in foreign countries is just really, and you even said you weren't aware that there were other religions necessarily when you were growing up, because you were surrounded by Christians. So you knew there were heathens all around, but not necessarily other religions that also believe that they are the one true way.
Correct. And so there was only one true religion, and our goal was to help everyone else join that religion. So I grew up very sheltered. It wasn't a very safe country. So I grew up with a lot of fear, particularly about men. Rape was a big part of the culture in Papua New Guinea. And so even from really little, I remember being scared at night because I was afraid someone would break in and hurt me, because that happened a lot. So just a lot of fear of men. And relying on men that we could trust to protect us all the time, right? So we couldn't go out after dark unless we were with a man. And so it really taught me that I needed a man to be safe. I also had to be careful about men because they could hurt me. And all I wanted was to grow up and get married and have kids, because that's what good women do, right? And I did do that, right? And then my life changed because that wasn't fulfilling for me. But it was just very, very conservative. Everyone was heterosexual. Everyone was monogamous. Divorce was not a thing. I didn't know a single person from the LGBT community until I moved to America when I was 18.
Wow. Or at least not anybody who professed or was able to live openly that way. And I wonder too, because sadly we do hear just a lot of concerning and upsetting stories of abuse that has gone on in the mission schools. And even living right there on the campus with your parents doesn't necessarily protect you. If there are predators in the school, they are very skilled at preying. I got my air quotes there. They know how to pick out prey and how to abuse. And so, that's a concern too, that missionaries are living in far-flung places. They send their kids someplace expecting they will be safe and cared for, and then just sometimes terrible things happen. So I don't know if that was the case on your compound. I hope not, but I suspect it's everywhere.
Yeah, I started being sexually abused when I was 5
Oh,
by another child that was older than me on the mission field. And then there were multiple people, adults, as I grew up from the mission field who also sexually assaulted me.
oh,
Um, and that's actually why I wanted to become a sex therapist, because as I was growing up and I was watching the model of what love looked like, I didn't like it. Like, I saw a lot of women who were afraid of their husbands. Now, years later, I can understand there's probably domestic violence going on, a really unhealthy power dynamic in a lot of those relationships. A lot of my friends were sexually abused. And so I wanted to grow up and help kids who had been through what I had been through, which, so I think it's kind of cool because all of this crazy stuff I went through as a child has helped me help so many other people in adulthood. But that's actually what made me want to be a sex therapist.
wow. I had no idea about that. Thank you for speaking so frankly about something that I think it actually affects a huge proportion of the population, but people just feel so uncomfortable acknowledging it, recognizing it, and even I certainly know I'm thinking of myself. I was in my 50s before I felt comfortable even acknowledging that abuse had taken place when I was a child with an older family member. And I didn't even feel comfortable calling it abuse. I asked one of my siblings who also works in mental health, I'm like, that wasn't really abuse, was it? And they said, yes, it was. But for me to get to that point of being able to recognize it, it was hard. So I appreciate your willingness to talk about it, and that's part of what had you go into this field where you can be helping other people. That's wonderful. Yeah. So then, how old were you? Did you mention you were 18 when you left and came to the United States?
Yeah. So I graduated from high school. There were 32 or 34 kids in my whole class, right? My whole grade. So very tiny.
Yeah.
And we all graduated and we went to our home countries all over the world. And so it was like saying goodbye, not only to your home, but to everyone you've ever known, right? They all just went to the other parts of the world. And so I moved to the States. I had major culture shock, to say the least.
You were by yourself?
My mom, I can't really remember, but I think my mom flew me back to the States and then dropped me off at college. And then she flew back to Papua New Guinea. And I was just kind of at this Christian college with thousands of kids, which
Right.
was way more people than I even knew existed. Right?
Yeah. I can just imagine.
Yeah. And I just couldn't relate to people from this country. I didn't grow up with television. Like, we could get videotapes. My grandpa would tape us things and send it overseas, and we could watch it in a VCR. But we didn't have cable. We didn't have restaurants. We didn't have any of the stuff that normal American kids had. And so I really struggled to relate to anyone my age. And so I kind of bebopped around to 4 different colleges because I was trying to find myself, which is very normal for missionary kids, because we think if we just find the right place, we'll belong and we'll fit in. And that doesn't really exist. You have to create home for yourself. But yeah, so I went to 4 different colleges and learned a lot about the world. And that's, I think, kind of when my deconstruction started, because I realized there are people that are gay and they're wonderful. And I realized people do go through divorces, and they're wonderful people too. And, I learned about drugs, and I learned about alcohol, and I learned about all of these things in American culture. So it was a lot, but it really helped me realize over the years how much of a tiny bubble I had lived in, and that I really had no life experience. So yeah, that's what happened when I came home.
Wow. So then I'm wondering, what's it like when you come out of such a really a bubble. And you're then you must have gone, did they put you in a Christian college?
Yes, I started out at a Christian college, then I went to a Bible college, and that was awful. So then I left there and went to a community college in PA, and then I finished off in another Christian college in Georgia. So
Why was the Bible college awful?
it was worse than the mission field, which is saying a lot.
Was it just fundamentalist or?
Yeah, like it was the first week that I got to Bible college. It was the week that boys would go meet all the girls and decide who they were going to marry. And so I actually had like dates. Okay, well, I'm going to call it a date, like in the cafeteria where boys would interview me to basically see if I was wife material, which I wasn't, according to them. And so the women just went to get married, right? The ring before spring kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we weren't allowed to wear print. We had to like cover all of our body, like all the time. And so I lived in sweatshirts in Georgia in summer because I was always paranoid that I was going to get in trouble. And you weren't allowed to drink, and you weren't allowed to touch the opposite sex. And, it was just, I had to go to classes like hermeneutics, which I failed, because I didn't understand it at all. And so it wasn't a good fit for me.
Wow. Yes. And so then you managed to get out of that, and you're having to navigate all these changes then on your own because your parents are not nearby. Were you in touch with your grandparents at that point, or family, friends, or anybody? Did you have any place in the United States that you could go to and feel safe?
So I could go to my grandparents. I had a set of grandparents in Pennsylvania and one in Maryland. And honestly, my grandpa, my mom's dad, and then my dad's mom were my best friends. I called them all the time. Every time I could go home, I would go see them. They walked me through so much change because I couldn't call my parents because at that time you couldn't call Papua New Guinea. It was like really expensive. I didn't have a cell phone yet. And they didn't have cell phones in Papua New Guinea. So I could email my parents, but there was no actual, if I'm in an emergency or I'm having a breakdown, I couldn't call them.
Wow. And were your grandfather and your grandmother, were they Christians as well?
So my grandma is, my grandfather was not, which was really helpful because he talked to me about my dating life because he wouldn't judge me.
Wow.
And my grandma helped with everything else, but I didn't really talk about the hard things with dating with her. So I had the best of both worlds. I had someone who didn't come from that Christian background and then someone that did. So that was really great.
Yeah, because I'm also thinking of how being in a bubble, I mean, you leave the bubble and then you're on a campus filled with all kinds of people that you don't know, people who've come from all sorts of different backgrounds, and maybe they grew up in homes that were unsafe or whatever's going on there. How do you even judge? Because you just think, oh, I'm at a Christian college. Everybody will be Christ-like. I'll be safe. Everybody will be safe. But we're interacting with people. If we have any codependent tendencies or traits, boy, narcissistic type folks zoom in on those right away. We can get into all sorts of confusing and dangerous relationships. But most of us have a parent somewhere nearby that can maybe point some things out to us. I'm super glad that you had your grandfather to talk to about dating.
Yeah. It's interesting that you talked about the narcissist kind of, being attracted. I got into a lot of really abusive, unhealthy relationships because I thought everyone was good, right? I thought everyone was kind. Everyone wanted the best for me. I believed in the good of humanity. And I just got taken advantage of over and over and over again. And at that point, I thought that if a boy picked you, so this is purity culture, right? So if a boy picked you, then you needed to make it work and you needed to choose to love them because you could choose to love anyone and make it work with anyone. That's what I was told. Mm-hmm. And if I was lucky enough for a boy to notice me, I should make it work with him. And I did that for years and years and years. And obviously now I know that that doesn't work at all. And but I realized at this point, I'm 39. It's the first time in my life that I'm with a partner because I chose that person, because I chose that person, not because they chose me. Right.
Wow.
And it's so freeing to know that I got to consent and I got to decide. And it's been life-changing for me.
Wow, that is so exciting and so heartwarming. I'm wondering, at what point along the way did you determine that you weren't going to be satisfied or happy in relationships, romantic relationships with men?
Mm-hmm. So when I was a little kid, I was attracted to girls, but I kind of blamed it on the sexual abuse being from a girl. And so I thought, well, that's why, And then when I went to middle school, I was attracted to women, to girls my age. And then in college, I fell in love with one of my best friends. But every time, because in my mind, I was told that, being gay is a lifestyle choice. It means you're going to hell. If you do think you're gay, then you can't act on it because, it's a sin. And so I had so much shame around these feelings that I had. And I was also confused at why do I have these feelings, right? And was it the abuse? And so I started to kind of experiment sexually with women when I was in college. And those were good experiences. But, I needed to get married to a boy and have kids. And that was, I kept focusing on that. And so when I met my husband, I told him at the time on our first date, I said, I am bisexual. At that time, that's how I identified. I now identify as pan. But I told him up front because I wanted to make sure that he could accept me as I was, because I had shame about it. And he was so welcoming of that and just, that's totally fine, not a problem.
Did you meet in church?
No, we did not. We met on eHarmony.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so then, we dated and got married. And, a couple years ago, I expressed interest in opening our relationship and in being with a woman. And he was, really supportive of that. And so our marriage didn't work out, but in that process of opening up and in me being able to embrace my sexuality, I met my wife, Angie, and she's wonderful. And I am now able to live my truth every single day. And I realized that the reason that none of those relationships with men worked isn't because I didn't work hard enough, isn't because I was a bad person. It's just because I'm not into men, right? And that's okay. And so I kind of came from the missionary, world, did a lot of deconstruction, tried, polyamory, and now I'm with my partner.
Wow, I love it. I love this story. Tell me how it went with your folks. So not only deconstructing from your religious beliefs or deconverting, however you want to say it, but then also, oh yeah, there's this other extra huge piece. I'm not into guys. So how did both of those things work out?
So unfortunately, the way things went down, I had to come out to my parents as getting divorced, being polyamorous, and having a female partner all in the same day.
Oh my gosh.
And they didn't know any of it. And I had to tell them because my partner at the time had said they wanted a divorce. And so I called them and I said, this is my situation. I need you to come home from Papua New Guinea, and I need you to help me. And so they listened. My mom shut down. And I think there was just such disappointment, because divorce is a sin in that world. Mm-hmm. non-monogamy is a sin in that world. Being with the same sex is a sin in that world. And so basically I broke every single rule that day.
Wow, all at once.
Yeah, but they did come home, and they helped support me. It did take them about a year and a half, I think, to really kind of accept that this is who I am. And I think it really took them seeing how happy I am. And I used to be very, very anxious and a very irritable, angry person. And I couldn't figure it out. And it's because I wasn't being my authentic self. And so I think they've watched me become this beautiful, amazing mom because I can be me. And I'm actually able to just let go of all of the, you should be this, this, and this, and just be myself. And so now they see how happy I am. And I don't think they'll ever agree with same-sex relationships, but they have welcomed my wife and they have done the best they can. And I can't expect more from them because I know my lifestyle is against their religious views.
Right. They, and this is how it is with our parents. They don't have to agree, but they do have to accept if they want us to remain in their lives. Wow, that is just so fantastic. And so I'm trying to get a feel for the timeline here. When your marriage to your former husband ended, you had kids already? Were the kids little? What was they've gone through the transition as well, the change, the shift of mom and dad being together, and now mom has a female partner.
Yeah. What's really cool is, so my kids were definitely much smaller when this happened a couple years ago. But my wife is someone that I had been friends with for like 8 years. So my kids knew her. They had interacted with her many times. She and her ex-partner were a part of our family. And so they babysat the kids. We went to Disney together, as couples and with the kids. And so they were a big part of our family. So when it moved from mommy and daddy to mommy and Angie, it was really easy for them in a lot of ways because they already knew her and they loved her. Obviously, the divorce part has not been easy for them because mommy and daddy are not together, but Angie wasn't new to them. And so I think that was kind of perfect, that I didn't find some random person. And they just adore her.
Nice.
Yeah.
So cool. And you really touch, I think, on an important point. When we're raised in, Christianity is what you and I both come out of, raised to see divorce as a disappointment, as a sin, as a failure. And we have to make the paradigm shift there. It's not a failure. It's just a transition. It's just a change. It's a doorway to a new phase of our life. It's a time for us to be rethinking our identity. So before, I had known myself as a Christian, pastor's wife, homeschool mom, anti-feminist, I wore a head covering, like all these things were all part of my identity. But I liken it to forcing a beach ball underwater, and you're holding it and the pressure is building and building. And finally, you take your hands off and it's just a messy, so much fallout from that, but we can't take the pressure. Something has to give. And so, boy, that can be a pretty big deal. And you were able to tell your parents about all these things, which must have just been a very shocking conversation. And kudos to your mom and dad for rising to the occasion and really doing their best to be supportive, loving parents, even for something they didn't understand or weren't able to endorse at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really something.
I was shocked that my parents were able to get where they are now. I never really felt loved by my parents the way that I wanted or needed to be loved. But over the past year and a half, it's the first time I really feel like they love me because they are able to continue to show up for me and support me, even though I am doing something completely against what they believe in. And so for me, that is love. Not necessarily the kind of love that I want or need all the time, but for them, that's huge.
Yeah, that feels like high level parenting. And sometimes when our parents are in the ministry, we don't receive the adequate attention, nurturing, love, because God and Jesus always have to come first. The ministry is first. We're like a distant second or third, or whatever the situation is. And then there's also that pressure on us a lot of times to be perfect, because it's life in a fishbowl. And what would people think? Oh my God, the amount of times I heard, "What will the neighbors think?" It just seems crazy. And I think in some ways that's generational too, because that is the last thing my kids hear from me. They certainly don't care either. But at the time, it seemed very important. And appearances, I think, for religious people are very important.
That's one of the biggest priorities. And I think as a missionary kid and pastors' wives or partners and pastors' kids, PKs, they feel it too, where like we're almost held at this higher pedestal in the church. And so not only are you a missionary kid, but you have to always be on, right? You're like going to church to church to church, and you're giving your story, and you have to interact with new people every night, and you're traveling the country, staying in people's houses, supporters' houses, and you have to exude Christ. And there isn't freedom or flexibility to mess up or to have a bad day or to just say, "I'm not going in front of the church today because I'm having a panic attack." It's like you put on your smile, you get out there, and you teach people about Jesus. And I grew up feeling like God and the ministry was always more important than I was. Because it didn't matter what was happening, we had to go out and preach the gospel.
Wow. Yep. In season and out of season. You got to do it.
All the time.
Oh my gosh. Did your parents at some point find out about the abuse that had been part of your life as well?
Yeah, I told my parents when I was 25 about two of the people that had abused me. And then over the years, I've had a couple conversations with my mom. My dad really can't hear that kind of stuff. So I did tell them, and, they've said they're really sorry that happened. But it's not a topic that they're comfortable talking about. Even what I do professionally is not something that they're comfortable talking about.
Yeah.
I think they think that sex is between a husband and a wife and shouldn't be brought out in front of other people. So being a sex therapist, why am I talking to people about their sex life? So it's pretty private.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. It's almost a perpetually juvenile or immature state that we can feel, be stuck in as Christians. And I'm speaking because that Christianity is my background, so that's what I know about. But the whole idea of even what you mentioned earlier, kind of wanting a man. We need a man, even though men can be scary. We need a man in order to have this nuclear family that's all the rage. Yeah, it's just. But we have to be able to grow up. We have to be able to have hard conversations and to acknowledge sex and sexuality as part of us. It's part of the human experience.
Right.
Wow. So then, what was it like? You continued your schooling then. You had jumped around to a few different colleges to get your first degree, and then you continued because you have your Ph.D. So was all this then done in Pennsylvania, the rest of it?
So I got my undergrad's in psych, and then I got my master's degree in Pennsylvania, and that was in social work. And then I got my LCSW, which is the licensing thing that takes 2 years. And then I decided I wanted to become a certified sex therapist. And so I found a program. I went to the ASECT conference in Colorado, and I met this group, Modern Sex Therapy Institutes. They had like a little booth there. and they provided online training and in-person training. You could like fly to West Palm Beach and do training to get your CST. And so that's when I started that. And then COVID hit. And so I didn't have to go in person at all. It was all online. And then MSTI, Modern Sex Therapy Institutes, started the PhD program, and I was in the first cohort. And so like the more I learned about sexuality, the more it helped me deconstruct and embrace who I am. But I also realized I just want to learn more and more and more and more, because I call myself a sapiosexual, which basically means we love brains, right?
Yes,
like,
yes. Show me your sexy brain. Yeah.
I know. I want to lick it. So I love learning. And so I am my best self when I am, getting a training, or I just finished a religious trauma certification. I always want to be learning. And so that's how I just kind of kept growing in the sex therapy field.
Yeah. And how does the deconstruction piece factor in? Like, what point were you at in your life when you started rethinking the whole Christianity thing and the Bible thing? Where was that piece of the puzzle?
I would say the most intense part of that journey, although that journey's never over and I'm still in it, started in 2019. I was so miserable in my relationship at the time, and I went outside my relationship because I just didn't know what else to do. And I went to, my partner found out at the time, and I started going to therapy again. And I remember I walked into the first therapy session, and the therapist, her name was Deb, and she was amazing. And she looked at me and she said, "Andreya, I don't care what happens to your marriage. And I don't care about any of the rules and the right or wrong or the infidelity or anything." She said, "Andreya, I want you to find you." She said, "Because that is what life is about." And she said, "So own your shit and let's work through it." And I was like, I found my woman, right?
That's fantastic.
And so I started doing really intense therapy work. And as I was doing inner child work with her, I started to realize, like, I've got to look at the religion. I've got to look at the trauma. I've got to look at all of it. And so I read this book called Leaving the Fold.
Yeah, by Dr. Marlene Winnell. Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh. That book was life-changing for me.
Yes.
And when I read that book, I realized I am totally done with that world. And because she was an MK and she wrote the book, and so I could relate to her. And that's really, so 2019 to 2022 was the biggest chunk of my deconstruction. And that's when I was writing my dissertation, right? So I decided I was going to write my dissertation on the negative sexual effects on women from purity culture.
Wow.
And so I wrote a curriculum for group therapy for women who grew up in evangelical purity culture, on how to process what happened, what they believe about sex and their bodies and pleasure, and then how to redefine and embrace new ideas about their sexuality. And so it was through that entire writing of my dissertation that I just was reading all the books and doing all the research, and I finally found me.
Oh, that's incredible. That's so wonderful. And so, did you have that conversation with your folks? Is that something that comes up, or they pretty much have figured out, since you're a sex therapist, you're probably not really big into their version of the Bible anymore?
Yeah, they knew for years that, like, I didn't go to church. I wasn't into the whole God thing. I asked them to read my dissertation. They were not going to, and I asked them to. And after they read the dissertation, I think they got the picture that Andreya is completely not into what we raised her to be into. And, at that whole, with all the polyamory and the divorce and all that stuff happening, they put it all together. We don't talk about it, like they didn't even really tell me what they thought of my dissertation. But they read it. And so that's as much as they can do, but they know where I'm coming from.
Wow, I really appreciate that they went to the trouble of reading something that they probably knew was not going to be easy for them to read. And I wonder if them doing that, I mean, that gave them such insight into you, the person you are, the person you've become. And now you say for the first time, you're really feeling like they do love you. And maybe for the first time, they really know you.
Yeah. Maybe it's because I'm allowed to be me and I'm not trying to be who I thought they wanted me to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And what about your grandparents? Were they still alive at this time when you were coming to these revelations?
So my grandpa died way before that. So he wasn't, but my grandma is still living. She has really struggled. Our relationship really changed with the divorce. And me being with Angie. We still love each other and we still talk, but we used to talk every day. We don't.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we talked every single day from 2003 till 2021.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And now I talk to her maybe once a month. I know I can't talk about certain things with her. She's disappointed. But I understand that, she's 89. Like, she's not going to change that perspective. But again, she still loves me and she still supports me. She just doesn't agree, and that's okay.
Yes. Yes. Once we can get to the point of being okay with other people not agreeing. I really like the idea of staying in our lane emotionally. And so the minute we try and manage someone else's reaction or response or feelings, we're veering out of our lane and into their lane. And that's not the best idea. We can really stay in our lane emotionally and following the advice of your brilliant therapist that you were working with, owning your shit, figuring your own stuff out and my own stuff out. I think there's something so empowering about that. Just that one conversation that you mentioned with your therapist, and she's really giving you permission and telling you, you are important enough. You are the central figure in your own life. So whatever anybody else thinks, all that kind of stuff, that pales in comparison to what you think, how you feel, and what you want. And we were not given that permission as girls growing up in Christian families. And I know also boys and men, they can really suffer also under Christianity because there are all sorts of rules and obligations and expectations put on them that they have to deal with. So I feel like no one gets out unscathed, but it's really something that you are doing the work that you do. So you mostly see women or AFAB folks in your practice. Is that correct? Or do you see everybody?
I see everyone. So I'm the only certified sex therapist in this area in Central PA, like outside of Philly. There's two other ones. They're each an hour away in different directions. So there's three of us that are actually certified. I'm the only one with a PhD. So because I'm the only gig in town, I have to see everything in the world of sex. But what I've realized over the past year and a half is that because of where I am in my healing, I don't think I'm the best therapist for male identifying people at this time because I'm going through a lot of things myself. And so I primarily work with female identifying people or vulva owners. And the other people in my practice see the male identifying people. I do a lot of couples work, but my passion is women. It's just helping them learn that they're normal and perfect just the way that they are, and that they are deserving of pleasure. They don't need to earn pleasure. Pleasure is their birthright. And that's the message that I want women to wake up and believe every day.
Oh my gosh. I love so many of the words that you just included in there, including the word vulva. And I feel like, so I'm in my my 50s now, getting to my middle 50s. And just, I didn't know that everyone's vulva can look different, quite different. There can be radically different colors, like different shapes and sizes. And that was a gift that I gave myself, to look at some artwork and photographs depicting this, because I see my body is changing. My body in my 50s is not, let me tell you, ladies, if you're in your 30s and you're like, oh my God, I hate how fat I am, let me tell you, you're going to get fatter. Your body's going to keep changing. You better learn to just love yourself as you are and be as healthy as you can be. But don't get tripped up by falling into this trap of somehow I have to look this one perfect way. We're allowed to change and grow, and that means our bodies are allowed to change and grow too. And even though my body maybe doesn't look the way that I wish it would look, my body still transports me from A to B. I'm very fortunate to be in good health. So I think that's really powerful and important. And I don't hear a lot of other people talking about women's bodies as they age and sex as we age too. So my new husband, we've been married a couple years. He's 22 years older than I am. And so that means there are changes and things that have gone on in his body as well. And we're very well matched. But I think it's important for people to talk about sex as we age and sexuality as we age. And this is something that I love about your generation, the freedom to talk about these things.
Right. Right. And it's something we don't talk about. And so when I get clients in here, whether they're 23 or 73, there's always this idea that I need to be thinner. My vulva doesn't look right. My libido is wrong. I'm not enough. Like, there's always this negative idea around the female body. And I just, what you're saying is so true. Like, it not only can our body change, it's supposed to change. Sex is supposed to change. And sex is fluid, right? It's constantly changing, ebbing and flowing. And what you like at 40 is different than at 20 and at 60. And if we could stop comparing ourselves to what we think we're supposed to like and supposed to look like and experience, and just embrace where we are, that's when you have this amazing sex life. Like, they did research, and the average age of best sex is 55.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's better now than it's ever been. So I think that's part of getting to know myself, part of also rejecting the purity culture shame and teachings that, even though it wasn't called purity culture when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, but it's the same idea, the same shame involved there. So leaving that behind and giving myself permission to experiment and be with different partners and figure out what I like and what I don't like, whether I'm solo or with someone else. And then I think also, having come through a marriage that was, pretty much 20 years in duration, that's a long time to be with one person. And then having had some relationships after that, before this next marriage, I really have such an appreciation for what it takes to be in a committed relationship with another person. And so I think maybe I'm able to bring more compassion and gratitude into things this time around. And yeah, I love my life. I'm so happy.
Sure, that's what we want.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about these things. Please tell us about the book that you have completed.
Okay. So I wrote a book for therapists. Sex therapists in particular, although it is for all therapists. What I noticed when I was getting my CST and my Ph.D. in clinical sexology is that the general attitude around Christianity in the sex therapy field was pretty negative. And so, and I get it, right? I totally get it. But then what do you do when you have clients from that background and from that culture? You can't go in with the traditional sex therapy perspective of like, everything's fine and free, and it's just it's so like out there compared to the evangelical kind of upbringing. And so I realized I wanted to help sex therapists learn the language and the culture so that when they're working with these clients, they don't scare them away in the first 10 minutes. And so that they can meet them where they are in whatever part, whether they are deconstructing, reconstructing, still in the middle of all of it. Like, how can we as sex therapists meet these people, women from purity culture, where they are, hear them, hold space for them, and not make them think that what they believe is wrong, but just give them other options, saying like, hey, that's an interesting perspective. Like, where did that message come from? Is it adding to the quality of your life? What would it feel like to not have that in your life? Like, have you thought about this? And so I wrote the book is based off of my dissertation. But basically it's my life story, how I got into sex therapy. I talk about, different cases that I've had as a therapist and how we worked through them. And then it's the whole curriculum, right? Of that they can work with individual clients and use the curriculum, or they could do it in group therapy. And so my hope is that we're going to get more mental health providers out there who understand this population and can actually help them on their journey and not scare them away. That's the goal of the book.
Beautiful. And what's the name of the book?
Deconstructing Purity Culture to Embrace Sexual Pleasure.
That sounds so good. And so where will people be able to buy the book from? And are regular people allowed to buy the book, or is it only going to be for people who are sex therapists? You have to show you have to show your coupon or something before you get it.
No, I think anybody could use it. I use it with my clients all the time. It's just the people I really want to read it so they can help more people, our therapists. But everyday people can read it. I think it's very relatable. I've had a number of people read it and they love it. It's not published yet. It's with the publisher right now. And so I'm not really sure when it's actually coming out. It's supposed to be either the end of this year or January, February of next year. And so I'm assuming that it will be on Amazon. I'm not sure because I've never written a book before, but we're all good to go. The manuscript is done and they're creating the cover.
Wow, that's so exciting. And I love that it will actually be done in time for the Shameless Sexuality conference that's happening in Seattle next year. I'm think this will be this is something that I'd like to promote. So thank you for coming on my podcast and sharing your experience with us. It really has been very interesting talking with you. I wish you didn't live so far away.
I know. It'd be fun to have coffee.
It doesn't seem fair that Pennsylvania gets you and Erica Smith, who wrote Purity Culture Dropout, because I love Erica. She's wonderful too, and you're both over there. Someone needs to come over here to BC. Okay, well, thank you again for joining me, and tell us how people can find you.
So I have a website, which is www.andreyajonescounseling.com. I also have a Facebook page that's Andreya Jones Counseling, where I just I like to write. So just put little posts. We have a blog on our website. So that's just the places that we're at. If you're interested in anything to do with sex therapy, our website, I have spent years getting it to where it has all the information you need. So what is sex therapy? How can this help me? Is it weird? All of those things are on the website. So if you're interested in sex therapy, check that out. And then we are always taking new clients. I have 5 of us that work here. We're all queer, and we are all women. And we just love helping people no matter who they are or where they are in their journey.
Awesome. And so I want people to know Andreya is Andreya, and it's AndreyaJonesCounseling.com. Counseling with one L, the American way. So
Yes.
people can find you, and I'll of course include this in the show notes. I hope our paths cross again. It was really nice meeting you today.
Thank you so much.
Talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Take care, and we'll see you again soon.